California has a long history of crime, from its gritty urban streets to its hidden corners. Over the years, certain figures have risen to power, turning the state into a center of illegal empires. These individuals built vast criminal networks, controlling major cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Oakland. Their influence spread far beyond California's borders, impacting communities and even international trade routes. In this video, we'll be exploring the top 7 most dangerous drug kingpins who shaped California's underworld, revealing the shocking scale of their operations and the lasting impact they've had on the state. Number 7. Anthony Ant Flowers. Anthony Ant Flowers emerged as one of the most notorious narcotic kingpins in California, specifically Oakland, during the late 1980s and early 1990s. His rise to power coincided with a violent narcotic gang war that wreaked havoc on the streets of East Oakland. Flowers started his criminal career as a schoolboy selling illicit substances in the Elmhurst district of Oakland and quickly rose to control his own crack narcotic empire after the fall of another notorious kingpin, Daryl "Little D" Reed. Flowers' narcotic empire clashed violently with rival gangs, most notably Timothy Black Bluett's gang, which had taken over after Reed's downfall. The two gangs battled fiercely for control of Oakland's lucrative narcotic market, with Flowers attempting to undercut Blewett by selling narcotic at a cheaper rate. This led to a bloody 3-year war marked by high-speed chases, automatic weapon firefights, and countless casualties. It was estimated that at least 16 lives were claimed during this period. One of the most infamous events tied to Flowers occurred in 1990, when his gang was implicated in the automatic weapons assault on a funeral home during services for 2 of Blewett's terminated the life of his associates. Despite the gravity of the crime, Flowers was only convicted of a misdemeanor firearms charge. Flowers also narrowly escaped a life sentence in prison after a police blunder invalidated a 1988 narcotic seizure case in which 20 kilograms of illicit substance and over $250,000 in cash were confiscated from his narcotic operation. The error, due to a falsified affidavit by an overzealous officer, allowed him to walk free once again. Despite his repeated brushes with the law, Flowers continued to run his narcotic trafficking operation and engaged in a violent turf war with Blewett's gang and their associates. The gangs used military-grade automatic rifles in shootouts, and the violence often spilled into broad daylight, terrifying the citizens of Oakland. Innocent bystanders were caught in the crossfire, with one particularly brutal incident occurring on March 7, 1990, when armed men slaughtered a rival dealer in a grocery store while children hid for safety. The war finally ended in 1991 when federal agents dismantled Blewett's gang, arresting 12 members. Yet, Flowers continued to evade serious punishment. He was finally brought to trial in 1994 after being caught in a federal sting operation that revealed his involvement in 6 large shipments of illicit substance, each consisting of at least 8 kilograms. Flowers was sentenced in 1999 in a high-profile federal court case that saw community leaders, including then Oakland Mayor Jerry Brown, attending the hearing. He was ultimately sentenced to 30 years in prison for his role in narcotic trafficking and the associated violence that devastated Oakland's neighborhoods. The war between Flowers' gang and Blewett's had also caused widespread collateral damage, claiming the lives of several innocent people, including Theodore Collins, a former gang member cooperating with police, and Patricia Welch, a motorist demised during a getaway chase. Despite his violent reign, Flowers' eventual conviction was seen as a victory for law enforcement, signaling the end of an era that had begun with another infamous Oakland narcotic kingpin, Felix Mitchell. Anthony Flowers, who was around 34 at the time of his sentencing, remains in federal prison, serving his 30-year term. And today, Flowers is likely still incarcerated, though details of his exact prison location remain unclear. Number 6. Daryl Reed. Daryl Lil D. Reed is one of the most notorious drug kingpins in California's history, particularly within Oakland during the 1980s. He rose to prominence as a crack cocaine dealer, dominating the streets as one of the youngest and most successful narcotic lords by the age of 20. His journey into the world of crime started early, influenced by his uncle, Felix Mitchell, a legendary illicit substance lord who controlled an interstate heroin trade in Oakland. Felix's flashy lifestyle, combined with his generosity toward the community, shaped Reed's early ambitions. Born and raised in Oakland, California, Daryl Reed grew up in a challenging environment, surrounded by crime, illicit substance, and poverty. He began engaging in petty crimes as a young teenager, selling weed before eventually transitioning into the more lucrative crack narcotic trade in the mid-1980s. By the time he was in high school, Reed was already moving thousands of dollars worth of crack each day. His sharp business instincts, discipline, and refusal to use the illicit substance he sold helped him rise quickly through the ranks. By 1988, he had amassed millions and controlled a significant portion of Oakland's narcotic trade, making him a central figure in the Bay Area's narcotic scene. Reed's operations were highly organized, and he gained a reputation for running a disciplined operation. He reportedly kept violence to a minimum in the areas he controlled, preferring to maintain order among his crew and avoid unnecessary conflicts. His success was rooted in the mathematics and strategy skills he had honed in his youth, and by the age of 18, he had saved nearly $1 million, which he used to expand his business. On December 8, 1988, Daryl Reed's criminal empire began to crumble. Just 2 weeks after hosting a lavish black-tie party for his 20th birthday, attended by 3,000 people, including MC Hammer, Reed was arrested. He was charged with the possession of 14 kilograms of crack narcotic, a substantial amount that highlighted the scale of his operations. His arrest marked the end of an era for Oakland's narcotic trade, as Reed had been one of the most influential figures in the Bay Area's illicit substance network. In 1990, Reed was convicted under the harsh federal sentencing guidelines for crack illicit substance. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, despite being a first-time offender. The sentencing guidelines of the time were particularly harsh for crack offenses, leading to sentences that were disproportionately long compared to those for illicit substance. Reed's case became emblematic of the disparities in sentencing laws, which disproportionately affected African American communities. While serving his sentence, Reed began to reflect on his life and the choices that led him to prison. His uncle, Felix Mitchell, had been slaughtered in prison, and Reed vowed not to suffer the same fate. Reed was one of 111 federal inmates whose sentences were reduced, many of whom were sentenced under outdated and discriminatory narcotic laws. After serving 26 years of his 35-year sentence, Reed was released in December 2016, just before the new year. Number 5. Thomas Reese. Thomas Tootie. Reese was one of the most notorious African-American narcotic kingpins in Los Angeles during the 1960s and 1970s. Born into a city rife with growing narcotic trade opportunities, Reese entered the narcotic business in 1965 and built a vast network that spanned narcotics, marijuana, and eventually illicit substances. Reese's criminal enterprise was marked by his hands-on approach to dealing in illicit substances, often conducting business personally rather than delegating tasks. His organization included a small group of loyal associates, among them brothers Ron and Conway Waddy, who helped him manage his growing empire. Reese's rise to prominence in the Los Angeles illicit substance scene came at a time when illicit substance was losing its dominance among other illicit substances, which had become the narcotic of choice for the wealthy. With his connections, including an ongoing relationship with an Iranian narcotic supplier, Reese capitalized on this shift. He was one of the first narcotic dealers in LA to introduce freebasing illicit substance, a method of smoking the substance that intensified its effects. He is even credited with teaching celebrities like Richard Pryor how to freebase. By the 1970s, Reese had solidified his position as one of the most powerful figures in the LA underworld, known as the King of Narcotics in black communities. His reputation grew, but he was never far from the business itself. In one case, during a negotiation for a pound of narcotic, Reese brandished a shotgun to emphasize his seriousness, a move that encapsulated his ruthless approach to dealing. Reese's criminal career was punctuated by numerous arrests, though he often managed to evade long-term imprisonment. In 1972, he was arrested in Los Angeles and charged with possession and distribution of narcotics. He was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in prison, but this conviction was overturned by a federal appeals court. Reese's ability to avoid conviction in several major cases, including a 1976 acquittal on income tax evasion and a 1978 acquittal on narcotics distribution, only added to his legend in the streets. In 1979, federal law enforcement launched an extensive investigation into Reese's narcotics empire. Authorities considered him the top African-American narcotics trafficker in Los Angeles at the time, though he managed to avoid significant legal consequences for a few more years. However, by the early 1980s, the illicit substance game had shifted with the emergence of crack illicit substance, and Reese found himself struggling to keep up with younger, more aggressive narcotic dealers like Freeway Ricky Ross. Reese's downfall began in June 1983 when undercover DEA agents contacted Kevin Morgan, one of his associates, looking for a narcotic supplier. This operation led them to Reese's family, including his daughter Rhonda and his 13-year-old son Thomas Jr., both of whom were involved in narcotic deals. Despite his suspicions that the agents were law enforcement, Reese engaged in multiple transactions, selling illicit substances to undercover officers over several months. In September 1983, Reese, along with his wife Linda, made a final deal with the undercover agents, selling them 2 kilograms of narcotics for $50,000 at the Marina International Hotel in Marina del Rey. Both were arrested shortly afterward, and a search of their home uncovered several firearms, including a semi-automatic carbine rifle and a .44 Magnum revolver. On December 2, 1983, a federal indictment was unsealed, charging Reese with 24 counts of narcotic-related offenses. By June 19, 1984, he was found guilty on 20 counts of narcotics-related crimes, though a charge of illegal firearm possession was dismissed. His wife, Linda Reese, was convicted on 6 counts, including conspiracy to distribute illicit substance. Reese faced up to 129 years in prison, but was ultimately sentenced to 35 years. Linda was sentenced to 10 years. As of now, Reese is still serving his sentence in an undisclosed prison till date. Number 4. Felix Wayne Mitchell. Felix Wayne Mitchell, better known as Felix the Cat, was one of California's most infamous illicit substance kingpins, whose criminal activities had a profound and enduring impact on Oakland and surrounding areas. Born on August 23, 1954, in East Oakland, Mitchell's life trajectory into organized crime began at a young age. By the time he was a teenager, Mitchell had created a criminal network known as the 69 Mob, which soon evolved into a highly organized and ruthless illicit substance trafficking operation. His criminal empire extended beyond Oakland, with connections reaching Los Angeles and Detroit, and his influence permeated communities throughout California. Mitchell's 69 Mob was primarily involved in the sale and distribution of narcotics. Before the rise of crack illicit substance in the mid-1980s, pure narcotics was the dominant illicit substance in the region, and Mitchell capitalized on this, earning millions annually through his illegal operations. It is estimated that his narcotic empire generated between $400,000 and $1 million per month, and he ruled the heroin market in the East Bay with near monopoly control. His control was so complete that the criminal organization enforced territory using children as lookouts and delivery agents, and drive-by shootings were deployed to intimidate competitors and clients who stepped out of line. Mitchell's lavish lifestyle, supported by his illicit wealth, was notorious in Oakland. He flaunted his success by hosting extravagant parties, purchasing expensive cars, and adorning himself with gold chains. Despite his criminal activities, he was somewhat of a folk hero in parts of Oakland, especially among the youth, due to his willingness to share his wealth with local residents and sponsor community programs. To maintain dominance in the illicit substance trade, Felix Mitchell faced significant opposition. He clashed with rival crime families, most notably the Mickey Moore family and the Funktown USA gang, which was led by Harvey Wiesenton. These rivalries frequently erupted in violent confrontations, with drive-by shootings and homicides becoming commonplace as the '69 mob worked to maintain control. The violence associated with Mitchell's operations had a devastating impact on the community, and law enforcement faced immense challenges in bringing his organization to justice due to the sophistication and ruthlessness of its members. Mitchell's criminal activities eventually drew the attention of both local and federal law enforcement. By 1983, the Oakland Police Department and the FBI had compiled enough evidence to arrest him. He was charged with narcotics trafficking and sentenced to life imprisonment in June 1985. Mitchell's conviction was seen as a major victory for law enforcement and was expected to disrupt the flow of narcotics in the region. However, the arrest of Felix Mitchell did not bring the expected relief to Oakland. In what criminologists have dubbed the Felix Mitchell paradox, crime and violence in the East Bay actually increased following his imprisonment. Mitchell had held such tight control over the illicit substance market that his removal from the scene led to a power vacuum. Smaller gangs, vying for control of the now leaderless narcotic market, engaged in violent turf wars, exacerbating the violence that Mitchell's imprisonment had been expected to quell. On August 21, 1986, Felix Wayne Mitchell was fatally stabbed in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, just 2 days before his 32nd birthday. Despite his life sentence, Mitchell only served 14 months before his untimely demise. His assassination, which occurred under mysterious circumstances, remains officially unsolved, with no one charged for the crime. Number 3. Rick Ross Freeway. Ricky Donnell. Freeway Ricky Ross is one of California's most infamous narcotic kingpins, known for running a massive narcotic empire during the 1980s in Los Angeles. Born on January 26, 1960, Ross was raised in south-central Los Angeles, where he initially aspired to become a tennis player, but failed to obtain a scholarship due to his illiteracy. This setback led him to a different path, one that would cement his name in the criminal history of the U.S. Ross's foray into the world of narcotic trafficking began in 1979 when, at just 19 years old, he was introduced to illicit substance by a community college teacher involved in the drug trade. Starting with small amounts, Ross quickly expanded his operation, soon selling ounces and then kilograms of illicit substances. His supplier connections, particularly with Nicaraguan exile and dealer Danilo Blandon, allowed him access to massive quantities of narcotics at significantly lower prices. At the peak of his empire between 1982 and 1989, Ross's operation was pulling in astronomical sums. By selling narcotics not only in Los Angeles, but in major cities across the U.S., including St. Louis, Kansas City, Cincinnati, New Orleans, and others, Ross reportedly grossed over $900 million, equivalent to billions in today's dollars. It was claimed that on some days, he made $3 million in sales. Much of his success was attributed to selling crack narcotics, which was cheaper, more addictive, and easier to distribute. Ross's moniker, Freeway Ricky, came from the properties he owned along the Interstate 110 Harbor Freeway in Los Angeles. This freeway-connected narcotic empire reached deep into American cities and played a critical role in the crack epidemic that ravaged urban communities during the 1980s. Ross's ability to secure large amounts of illicit substance at incredibly low prices, thanks to his connection with Blandon, made him a pivotal figure in the narcotic trade. Ross's narcotic network expanded across 42 U.S. cities, with his largest profits coming from areas in Ohio. At the height of his empire, he was moving as much as 1,000 pounds, 454 kilograms, of narcotic per week. His vast operation even employed thousands of people, some of whom used sophisticated tools like police scanners and voice scramblers to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. And in 1985, law enforcement began intensifying its efforts to dismantle Ross's empire. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, LASD, and the LAPD formed the Freeway Ricky Task Force to target Ross. However, due to corruption within law enforcement and Ross's ability to outmaneuver his pursuers, arrests and successful seizures of narcotics were rare. In 1987, a failed police sting ended with Ross being arrested, but the charges were dropped due to police misconduct. It wasn't until 1996, during a sting operation in Cincinnati, that Ross's downfall came. He was caught trying to purchase over 100 kilograms of illicit substances from a federal agent in a setup orchestrated by Blandon. This marked the end of Ross's reign as one of California's most notorious narcotic kingpins. In 1996, Ross was sentenced to life imprisonment under the three-strike law for his role in the narcotic transaction. However, his legal knowledge, gained during his time in prison, helped him identify a loophole in his case. He successfully appealed the life sentence, and in 2005, a federal court found that the three strikes law had been incorrectly applied. His sentence was reduced to 20 years, and Ross was released from the Federal Correctional Institution in Texarkana, Texas, on September 29, 2009. Number 2. Michael Harris. Michael Harry. Harris is a notorious figure in California's narcotic trafficking history, primarily during the 1980s. Born and raised in south-central Los Angeles, Harris started his career with high ambitions beyond the narcotic world. He was classically trained as a pianist and pursued acting in college, but his environment ultimately led him into the illegal substance trade. By age 20, Harris became a narcotic kingpin, distributing crack illicit substance across the U.S., supported by connections with both the Bloods and Rollin 60s Crips gangs, as well as Colombian narcotic cartels. Harris built a narcotic empire that spanned multiple states, including New York, Florida, Texas, and Arizona. His operation grew exponentially, allegedly generating millions in revenue. His vast network and ties with violent gangs made him one of the most powerful narcotic traffickers in the country, specifically in California. As he accumulated wealth, he became involved in various criminal activities, such as narcotic trafficking, money laundering, and forceful abduction. In 1988, Harris was arrested and charged with attempted manslaughter, abduction, and narcotic trafficking. He had orchestrated an abduction and attempted manslaughter of a relative who was suspected of stealing from his narcotic operation. Harris was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison, with an expected release in 2028. His narcotic empire and criminal activities came to an end with his indictment, which included multiple narcotic-related charges. While in prison, Harris shifted his focus to the entertainment industry. In the early 1990s, he played a pivotal role in the founding of Death Row Records, a label that would revolutionize hip-hop. Through an attorney named David Kenner, Harris invested in Suge Knight's vision of creating a music label. His financial support helped launch the careers of artists like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac Shakur. Harris's involvement in Death Row was significant, though his role was often overshadowed by Knight's aggressive leadership. Despite his criminal past, Harris began advocating for justice reform while in prison. After serving over 3 decades behind bars, his sentence was commuted by former President Donald Trump in January 2021. Snoop Dogg, MC Hammer, and other influential figures in the entertainment industry lobbied for Harris's release, arguing that he had transformed into a reformed figure who could make a positive impact on society. Trump's decision to grant clemency was one of his final acts in office, cutting Harris's sentence short by 7 years. Since his release, Harris has pledged to devote his life to preventing others from following the same destructive path. Number 1. Waterhead Beau. Brian Waterhead Beau. Bennett was a notorious drug kingpin who dominated California's cocaine trafficking scene during the 1980s. Born and raised in south-central Los Angeles, Bennett's early life seemed typical. He grew up in a crowded household on West Florence Avenue with 7 siblings. By his early 20s, Bennett's transformation into a narcotic dealer was swift and dramatic. He moved from modest beginnings to a luxurious lifestyle, managing operations that stretched from Detroit to Denmark. At just 24 years old, Bennett was already living in high-end apartment complexes and spending extravagantly, funded by his rapidly growing narcotic empire. Bennett's rise in the illicit substance world began when he partnered with Mario Ernesto Villabona Alvarado, a Colombian narcotic kingpin in the mid-1980s. Villabona supplied Bennett with massive amounts of narcotics, making him one of the most powerful narcotic dealers in the United States at the time. The scale of their operation was staggering. Federal investigators uncovered that between December 1987 and November 1988, Bennett and his associates trafficked nearly 15,000 kilograms of narcotics. Some individual shipments were as large as 1,000 kilograms, sold at wholesale prices below $9,000 per kilogram, a fortune in the narcotic trade. Bennett's influence spread far beyond California. He supplied vast quantities of narcotics to other major players in the crack illicit substance epidemic, including Rayful Edmond, a notorious narcotic dealer in Washington, D.C., and Michael Harrio Harris, who used his illicit substance profits to finance death row records. Bennett's ability to work at such high levels, while remaining relatively low profile in his home neighborhood, made him a key figure in the U.S. narcotic trade. His operation was so vast that it helped fuel the crack epidemic in various cities across the U.S., contributing to a sharp rise in narcotic-related crimes and addiction. Bennett's newfound wealth allowed him to live a life of luxury. He bought expensive cars, designer clothes, and lavish properties, including a $500,000 home in Tempe, Arizona, complete with tennis courts, basketball courts, and a swimming pool. He frequented high-end casinos like Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, where he was treated like royalty. Casinos, eager to cater to high rollers, flew him in private jets, offered him luxury suites, and gave him access to championship boxing matches, including ringside seats to see Sugar Ray Leonard fight. Bennett became a regular at these extravagant events, often tipping staff with $100 chips and surrounding himself with flashy women and friends who enjoyed the high life as much as he did. Despite his ability to avoid major legal trouble for years, law enforcement eventually caught up with Bennett. His empire began to crumble in 1988, when federal agents ramped up their surveillance efforts. His apartment on South Gramercy Place in Los Angeles became a focal point for investigators, who observed Bennett and his associates frequently transporting large sums of cash. His family, including his brothers Tony and Darren Bennett, were also involved in his narcotic operations, serving as couriers. His mother, Minnie Finley, was suspected of transporting narcotic money, but was never charged with any crimes. By late 1988, Bennett's connection to Mario Villabona and his large-scale narcotic operation was undeniable. The wiretaps, undercover operations, and surveillance provided enough evidence for his arrest. Bennett and Villabona were indicted on federal narcotic trafficking charges, and their operation, which moved illicit substance throughout the U.S. and internationally, was shut down. Bennett was arrested and charged with illicit substance trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering. Investigators were able to link him directly to the distribution of at least 15,000 kilograms of illicit substances, but the true extent of his operation may have been far greater. Bennett was convicted and sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His fall from grace was swift, and his empire, once one of the largest illicit substance distribution networks in the country, was dismantled. Bennett remains in federal custody that we do not have its name at time of this piece. serving his sentence in a high-security federal prison.